All right, well, Prusa has announced the Core One 3D printer, and I figure it's time for hot takes. Now, if you weren't aware, I have in the past talked about Prusa and 3D printing in general, and back then I talked about some of the challenges that Prusa has in competing against companies like Bambu Lab and Creality. And I think this is their answer to printers like the X1C and the Creality K1 or K2. And so looking at their announcement, it generated some feels because I am not anti-Prusa. As a matter of fact, I really want Prusa to succeed, and I'm not sure this is it. So what is the Prusa Core One? Well, it is a CoreXY consumer-oriented printer, and that is a bit different than, say, the Prusa XL, which was a CoreXY printer, but was clearly focused on more of a prosumer or professional or commercial environment. If you look at how big it was, if you look at the multiple extruders and how complicated that thing was, and frankly the price, that was not meant to be a replacement for your regular everyday desktop printer. And, I do think that the Mark IV's, while a very, very good bed slinger, really started to fall behind in competitiveness with the newer CoreXY printers, which were typically much faster and came with fully enclosed print environments. So the Core One kind of addresses a lot of that stuff. It is CoreXY. It is fully enclosed. It uses an all-steel exoskeleton, which basically means it uses a frame with panels attached to it. And here's where, the differences are in the kinematics and the way the printhead moves and the way the gantry moves, but it looks like they used basically the same print bed. So the X and Y dimensions are 250 by 220, whereas the existing Prusa Mark IV's was 250 by 210. And it kind of seems like this was a choice that Prusa made to keep this printer with as many interchangeable parts with the Mark IV's as possible. And they did actually make a way that you can upgrade from the Mark IV's to the Core One. And so I think that they didn't want to leave people that were using the older bed slingers behind, and they wanted to kind of honor their historic customer base and allow them to be able to upgrade. And frankly, I think that was the wrong choice because to me, this is one of the main disappointments is the build volume is too small. Now they've got a decent Z height, but if you're into 3D printing, Z height is not as useful because Z movements are so much slower because of the layers and everything else. Now, the Core One is competitive with like the Creality K1C's build volume, so that's a 220 by 220 with a 250 on the Z height, but Creality recently launched the K2, and the K2 Plus is a 350 by 350 XY with a 350 millimeter Z height. It's a really big printer. And the Bambu Lab X1 and X1C are 256 by 256 in the XY with a little less Z height of 256 compared to the Prusa Core One's 270. So it sits on the lower end out of all those printers as far as its total build volume. It's more like the Creality K1, which is way cheaper, and less like the Bambu Lab or the K2 from Creality. And the thing is, the K2 Plus costs around $1,300. The K1C is currently dirt cheap at about $550. The Bambu Lab X1C costs $1,000 currently here in the United States. And so that means as far as price competitiveness, the Prusa Core One is in the mix. You can get the Prusa Core One for $1,200 pre-built or $950 as a kit. So that $950 is just below where the Bambu Lab X1C is. The assembled version is a little bit more expensive than the Bambu Lab, and it's more in the range of like the K2 from Creality. So it's in the mix on price, but it is smaller typically than most of those printers, with the exception like the K1, but that K1 is way, way cheaper. Now, they try to spin this as a good thing, and they talk about the compact footprint of this printer. Now, they say, oh, it leads to a 30% increase in print volume, but the vast majority of that is due to the increased Z height compared to the Mark IV's. You're only getting about 5% more area in that XY plane. So it's really, unless you're printing really tall stuff, this isn't really going to fit anything that a Mark IV's wouldn't already print. But now I will say, smaller printers have a place, and it is a nice compact footprint. They do point out that the footprint is smaller than the Mark IV's, and one of the cool little features they have here is that on the side you can put print spools, and it stays internal to the printer volume, and this is basically because of the space that a CoreXY system takes up. You have to have extra volume for that above and beyond what the print bed has, and so you do kind of have some dead space in a CoreXY system. They're using that to store some filament spools, so that's nice, but again, I would have preferred to see it be a little larger. Now, what else do we have? Well, they have some options. So you could add on a USB-C camera. You can add on filtration. They have a little GPIO output expander so that you could trigger other things if you wanted. And so that's additional add-on too. So there are some interesting options that this thing has. But this is once again an area where they actually lag their competitors a little bit. The Creality K2 Plus comes with 2 cameras. The Bambu Lab X1C comes with a camera. It also comes with filters. The Creality K1C also comes with a camera and filters. So Prusa is giving you the capability of adding options when their competitors include all of this out of the box. So while these are nice things, and definitely they're things that people want, you got to pay extra for them. And so I'm a little worried about Prusa here because, again, I wanted this product to be much more than what it's ending up looking like. I wanted it to be something that could really go toe-to-toe with the Bambu Lab or the Creality printers. And I don't doubt that it's going to have exceptionally good user experience, that it's going to perform great, that it's going to have fantastic print quality. So I'm not trying to say that this is not going to be a very good printer. But whenever I look at it, it's clear that what this seems to be is basically the next step from a Mark IV's. It's basically just their version of a desktop printer, and it's not really bringing new features to the market. It's not very unique. It's not an exceptional value. It's just another CoreXY printer that's going to be very well sorted, that you're not going to have to fiddle with. And that historically has been a big competitive advantage that Prusa has had. The problem is, as soon as Bambu Lab dropped the X1C, that competitive advantage that Prusa has always had, that they were the real easy way to do 3D printing where you didn't have to fight with the 3D printer, that's gone. And they aren't the only ones offering that type of experience anymore. And that puts them in a really tough spot because the X1C has features that the Prusa CORE One doesn't, and it doesn't cost much more. And if you want to talk features, man, the Creality K2 Plus is bringing it. Now, I am not completely sold on their quality, and I do figure they're going to have some teething issues with this printer. But I mean, look, this thing is 350 by 350 by 350. You can add on their CFS filament management stuff. They have, dual cameras. They have a heated chamber. They're using servos for their motors. And this thing is priced real competitively. And so, that's something you got to keep in mind. You talk about bringing stuff to the market. Creality decided to throw down the gauntlet with this K2 Plus. Now, again, I don't know what issues they may have with it. I have no experience with it. I haven't looked in depth to the reviews. I expect the Prusa to probably offer an easier experience. But again, as far as feature set, they're not bringing anything to the table that everybody else hasn't already had for a while. And this is tough because, I mean, you got Creality putting out the K1C and it's $450. It's an enclosed CoreXY printer. It's going to print real fast, and it's already got hardened gears and hardened nozzles, so you can, print filaments that have additives, no problem. It's got all the other features like cameras, and it's got filters and, all kinds of stuff for way, way less money. So I guess my gut reaction, my quick take is I'm a little worried that the Prusa CORE One is too little, too late. It's a little not competitive on features because it lacks things that everybody else already has. Now, it does have some big advantages that I don't want to act like I'm ignoring. They do have open source software and firmware. Now, in here, I haven't seen anything about the hardware being open source, so I'm guessing that they are going to keep the hardware proprietary, which, given the way the frame is made, you weren't going to be able to build this thing anyway. Again, for those that like to tinker, I think that Prusa is going to offer a lot of good access to being able to modify your printer. I think parts availability is probably going to be good. I think support's going to be excellent. I think it's going to be a well-sorted printer that you can always fix. You're going to be able to do great things with this printer. And I think the real question is, do you care about things like having to pay for the MMU3 and it costing more and maybe not being quite as functional as an AMS is? Do you really care about having to pay for HEPA filters? Do you like having to pay for, putting in a camera when everything else already has cameras? The Prusa is also designed and manufactured in the EU, and I do believe they have announced that there will be versions that are assembled here in the United States. For those that are passionate about that and are really looking to support a manufacturer that builds things in Europe and the US, so they really do have some compelling arguments for why you might want to buy this printer. And at $950 for the kit, that's not terrible. But I really don't understand why they didn't include a camera. I don't understand why the filters aren't already there when, again, that has become standard for these enclosed CoreXY type systems. I'm okay, I think, with the lack of a heated chamber. Certainly you don't have to use servo motors or anything. But, not having a camera built in, look, my Ultimaker that was produced like 8 years ago had a built-in camera. So lacking that out of the box really is kind of a head scratcher. I think the footprint's a little small, and I really think they need to work on their multi-material kind of stuff. That MMU, it's just not a good-looking product, and it's kind of expensive for what it is. I'm also not really that happy about the fact that it doesn't look like they're including like hardened nozzles or gears in this for the use of like fiber-filled filaments, because again, that's become really common with their competitors. And so again, they've just made some questionable decisions where I'm not sure if they were too focused on keeping compatibility with the Mark IVs or where they were trying to maybe save some money on things. But again, I don't know. I am very mixed when it comes to this printer because I think it's going to produce really good prints and is likely going to be a very great experience for everybody that buys them. But for them as a company, I'm worried that they're not going to sell as many of these as I would like to see them sell because the competition is just a little too good these days. So those are my thoughts. I'll link to this blog post and their video on YouTube. I'd love to hear what you think about it. Is this a printer that you find compelling? Would you buy this instead of a Bambu Lab X1C? Would you buy this instead of one of the new Creality K1 or K2 printers? Is this competitive going into 2025 for consumer 3D printers at that kind of mid-tier where you're going a little over $1,000? Does this speak to you as, yep, this is the one I want? I'd love to hear what you have to think. Thanks.